Good morning and welcome everyone. My name is Sophia Bork. I am your MC for this year's Catholic Charities of Atlanta leadership class. And thank you all so much for joining us on this balmy fall morning. Today, we are going to be listening and focus our event on empathy and hear ways to incorporate Christ's commandment to love your neighbor as yourself, so you may weave more of this essential leadership quality into your leadership style. Let us begin, as we always do, in prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Holy God, we come before you with awe, for you are great in love and power. Some of us come with sadness, some with joy, yet we all know you receive us as we are. Mighty God, stay with us always as we worship and as we share the risk and challenge of living our faith. By your Spirit, turn our fear to courage and our confusion to confidence. Teach us, God, with your healing fire. Speak to us through your word. Abide always in our prayers, the spoken and the unspoken, and make your word come true in our hearts. We pray this in the name of Jesus our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. It is my distinct honor to welcome and introduce our next speaker, Dr. Cory Labrecque. And everyone, you are in for such a treat. Dr. Cory is just wonderful. He spoke last year for our leadership class, and it is such a blessing and a gift to have him here today again with us. Cory is an associate professor of theological ethics and bioethics, and the inaugural chair of educational leadership and the ethics of life in the Faculty of Theology and Religious Studies at the University of Laval in Quebec City, Canada. Previously, he served as the Raymond F. Schnodzy Scholar in Bioethics and Religious Thought and the director of the Master of Arts in Bioethics program at the Center for Ethics at Emory University. Cory was also co-director of Catholic Studies in Emory's College of Arts and Sciences. He earned a BSc in Anatomy and Cell Biology, a Master of Arts in Religious Studies with specialization in bioethics, and a PhD in Religious Ethics at McGill University in Montreal, Canada, where he was a course lecturer in the Faculty of Religious Studies, the Institute of Parasitology, and the Department of Physiology for several years. We know Cory as a Catholic scholar whose doctorate is in religious ethics, and we are so thrilled to have Cory speak to us today. He is going to begin with a meaningful story that many of us will be able to relate to, and Cory's role really today is to help us define empathy and offer examples through the word found in the gospel. Our role is a very easy one this beautiful morning. It's to listen and open our hearts and really help us expand our understanding of the empathetic servant leader. Welcome, Cory. Bonjour. We're so excited to have you here with us this morning.
Thank you so much, Sophia. Do you hear me well enough?
Beautiful. Oh,
good. I may be screaming at you. Thank you. That was a very kind and very warm introduction. And it is only ever, right, the great Southern hospitality and charm where you feel so much at home, right? As soon as people start opening their mouths, suddenly you just feel like you belong, right? It's your family. And I'm always so almost heartbroken. I feel homesick, right? When I'm in Quebec City and you're all in Atlanta, I have a deep connection to Atlanta, to CCA, and with all of you. So it's such a delight always to be with the leadership class in general, because I know where you're going. I feel very much one with you, even though I'm only seeing some of you for the first time today. So my deep thanks for having me with you this morning so early in the morning. It's not so balmy here in Quebec City, where it sits at about 45 Fahrenheit, which is quite lovely just now. It'll get warmer. I don't want people to think that we live in igloos and so on and so forth, which is often the case. But thank you. It's wonderful to be here. And today, what I hope to do is, break open this whole notion of what empathy is and what does it mean to be an empathetic leader by telling you just story after story. And for those of you who have heard me before, many of you are going to say, oh gosh, not this one again. Or is that my story? Because I've heard it so often now that I think it might be the one I've been a part of. So you'll hear some of these stories to echo, I hope, some of the material as we move through. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen if that's okay. Do you all see this?
Wow.
Great. Okay, let's begin. Let's begin with the word empathy, right? Which is a lovely word. I'm a little bit of a, I don't want to say a nerd, but I am, I guess. I'm a doctorate, right? I'm a university scholar, so I guess that makes me one. But the word comes from the Greek, right? Empathos. It means in the suffering of the other. And that is really where we're headed today. And I think at the end, what we're looking at with empathy is not just some passing what we call sympathy, right? So I think some of us know what sympathy might be. It's this passive, if I may, understanding of another person's suffering. So we send sympathy cards to people we might not even know, right? And we do this as a gesture of solidarity or a gesture of understanding. Empathy is a little bit different. Empathy is in the suffering of the other, or choosing, I prefer to say, choosing to enter the suffering of the other, choosing to enter another person's story, right? It's an intentional sharing in the experiences of the other. Maybe the other is completely different from you, but you're intentionally choosing to enter their story of suffering. And the whole point of empathy, I think, and you're going to hear me say this over and again, is to come to what I call, and this might be wordy, but you can just write it down for later, it's to come to a solidarity in our vulnerability.
Wow.
And I want to just stop for a second, because the word vulnerability is often thrown around in my own profession, right? I work often in medical contexts, and you know this, right? We talk about the vulnerable, and they're always the others, right? The kids, people with disease, people who are disabled, people with, right, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's always others, the others who are vulnerable. But the word vulnerable comes from this, it's a beautiful Latin word, vulnerus. It means wounded. So I prefer to use, instead of vulnerable, woundable. And empathy means entering the story of another in order for us to find communion or solidarity with others who are woundable. Because if my understanding of vulnerability is woundability, I think I may have just made that word up, that changes everything. It's no longer them, it's also me. Because if I've not been wounded, and if I'm not also still wounded now and woundable as time will pass, then I've missed something. And I think there's a deep communion when we think of other people as being woundable, just as I am woundable. And that's the root of empathy, right? Choosing to enter the story. And there is deep risk with empathy. Because when I choose to enter the story of the other, I too will start to share their suffering. And that's not pleasant, right? I risk my happiness in some ways. I risk my certain joys in some ways, even though those might be temporary, to share in the suffering of others. But I'm doing it, right? I'm doing it for solidarity. I'm doing it for communion. I'm doing it to bind myself to a co-woundable, if that makes any sense. So let me tell you a story then. Right, and you heard that this was coming from Sophia, and this is all I do, really. I'm just a storyteller. I do this with my students. I do this with my kids. I do this even with my poor wife, who hears story after story. But I think these help us, because I think we are united by our stories, right? I think I can, when I'm teaching my own students, for instance, at the end of the day, and I realize I don't want to belabor this, but at the end of the day, what I always find almost, I don't want to say laughable in a negative way, but what's always funny to me is that in written exams, and we still do that, in written exams, very often I'll have a really complicated concept and I'll ask them to define it, and they'll define it very quickly and then write a story that I told them. Oh, this is just like when the professor's mom was taking a walk, and they go on to retell the story, because that's how they understand the complexity of life, right, is through our stories. Very quickly. When I was in high school, I was, I don't know, like fourth, feet tall. I was the tiniest little guy, shoved in lockers right out of the TV, badly bullied. Long story short, I remember walking in through the back of the school. So high school for us in Canada is grades 7 through 11. And I remember at 13 looking like I was about 6 or 7. I don't have that gift anymore, but looking very young and walking through the back of the school. And there was always this girl sitting on the side, off to the side, reading a book, completely ignored. Nobody even, paid attention to her. And I remember seeing her there day after day after day, until finally I took up the courage, because I was also exceedingly shy. I took up the courage to stop and just say, hey, I noticed that you're here often. I see that you're reading this book, and would just engage her for, like, I would say maybe a minute, if not 2 minutes. Asked her how she was, and then I would go along my way, right? I would never see her during the day, that kind of thing. And I would speak with her every morning. Hey, how are you doing, Sarah? I'd learn her name. How are you doing? It came to pass years later that it was time for graduation. And I'm sure this is the same kind of tradition in the United States, but we have yearbook. Do you have yearbooks still? Is that still a thing? You have all these pictures of what happened during the year. And in our tradition, I suspect it's the same as yours. The graduates have like their photos, and there's a little blurb underneath that they get to write. You get like 20 words. I don't know what it is, 20 words or something. And you have to be witty, right? Because you only have those 20 words. Well, I got my yearbook, right? And I got a few of the yearbooks before and after me, because my sister was older than I was. And, we collected these yearbooks. Years later, I moved to Atlanta. This tells you how much longer it was. Moved to Atlanta, and my wife and I were packing our books, in tears. It was a very hard move for us to leave our family and to come to the South. And I remember we were packing these books, and we were looking at some of them. Of course, this is what you do. It takes hours to pack, as you will know. And I came across this silver yearbook. I'm like, oh, what's this? This is the year before me. I'm like, why do we even have this one? Like, who cares? My sister didn't graduate before, she graduated years before me. I mean, why do I have this book? Sure enough, I looked through it, just, and there I was, nerdo Cory, so small under tables and so on and so forth, doing all these school activities and stuff. I won every academic award under the sun, which is, I think, why my mom bought the yearbook that year. And I'm kind of embarrassed about it. But I get to the end of there, and I'm just flipping through the graduates. I didn't know them until I noticed one. And it was her, Sarah. That girl that I saw, and I'm like, where do I know her from? I couldn't even place her, right? I'm like, where do I remember her from? Oh, yeah. She's the girl that was at the entrance to the school when I'd come in. And my wife looked and said, oh, yeah, I remember her. She's the one that people would like spit at and throw things at. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And she's like, oh, yeah, you don't remember. And she would, she remembered certain things that I just did not. And I read her blurb. And the blurb, the 20 words, the blurb said, my love to my mom and dad, with whom I couldn't have survived these 5 years. And then it said, and my thanks to Cory for caring enough to make me feel like I mattered. And when I say I almost fell out of my chair, because there was more of a descriptive, there were not a lot of Corys in the school and so on and so forth. So I was able to know that that was me. And it's not to do this. But when I say I fell off my chair, because I thought, really though? Of all the words, after 5 years of life being tormented in many ways, because we know what bullying is, I spent 1 second with you a day, if that. And that's what you include here? Just yesterday, I was talking to my sister about that story, that exact story. And she said, Cory, who just talked to me, she said, my friend Wendy from high school, this is another quick story. My friend Wendy called me not very long ago, and we got to chatting about the past and so on and so forth. And high school is like 30 years ago for my sister now. And she said, you know what she said to me? And I'm like, no, please. And she said, Wendy also, a bully from a very poor family, a very difficult life, very much bullied. It's a lot of bullying, right, in high school. We need to get to that, but very much bullied herself. And she said, a story that I will always keep with me. And my sister said, go ahead. She said to my sister, Tammy, you were the most popular, you were the coolest, you won, you were the athlete of the year, you were the salutatorian, everyone loved you, people followed you everywhere, nobody cared that I existed. And one day in gym class, you call it gym, phys ed, in phys ed, it was time to pick teams. You know, that awful get the two captains and everyone picks the teams, you know, that awful situation of somebody being picked last. And she said, and you had the gall to call me first. And she said, I was the least athletic. I was the least known. Some people didn't even know I was in their class, and I'd been in their class for 5 years. And you had the gall to call my name, the first one. And I will say, she said this, she said, Tommy, when I walked up to you, it was the proudest moment of my life. And my sister said, I don't remember that. I don't remember what I wore. You know, these details for some of us are minute, and yet they are life-changing because they are empathetic, because for a second we choose to enter the story of another. And by choosing to enter the story of another, you change not a person, but a world. And in the Jewish tradition, there is that beautiful wisdom that says that when you talk to others, realize you're not talking to one, but you are talking to many. Because each of us is a world. We have spouses and children and grandchildren and friends and communities and so on and so forth. You carry all of that with you. It's not just you. No matter what the individualistic world tells you, it is never just you. And I hope that helps you, right, when it comes to empathy, what this might mean. Let me read you this beautiful passage from the Dutch Catholic theologian, Henry Nouwen. When we honestly ask ourselves, excuse me, I'm just going to move this. When we honestly ask ourselves which person in our lives mean the most to us, we often find that it is those who, instead of giving much advice, solutions, or cures, have chosen rather to share our pain and touch our wounds with a gentle and tender hand. The one who can be silent with us, I love that line, in a moment of despair or confusion, who can stay with us, remember this, who can stay with us in an hour of grief and bereavement, who can tolerate not knowing, not being able to cure or heal, and face with us the reality of our powerlessness, of our woundability, our woundedness. That is a person who cares, and that is a person I remember. Beautiful. Henry Nouwen, my goodness, we have an affinity for him here in Canada, who I suspect you as well. I do. According to the church, empathy is empty if it does not lead to compassion. Compassion's a lovely word too. It's almost like empathy, right? Compassion, it's Latin, compatior, it means to suffer with. So empathy is to be in the suffering of the other, to enter the other's story, right? The other person's story, which is supposed to lead you to act, right? Which is compassion. So the two are siblings. Do you see the difference? Empathy, I choose to enter the story of suffering. And then empathy leads me to act, which is compassion. I love that word passion there, patior. A lot of people have that, soap opera. Whenever I teach young students, they're like, passion. Or you're talking about the passion of the Christ, and they're like, Cory, you might want to change your wording there. You're like, no. Passion is the right word here. It's not soap opera passion, of course. Comes from the Latin patior, which means to suffer. And not just to suffer, it actually means to allow something to happen to you. Did you know that? It means to allow something to happen to you. In the very old English translation of the, that story of Jesus and the children, where he says, let the children come to me. I suspect you know this wonderful text. The old English is suffer the children to come to me. And as a kid, I was like, yikes, what are they doing there? Go see Jesus. It's almost like what we do with our children with our grandchildren. You go kiss your grandmother. It's almost that kind of image that I have. But it means to suffer, to let it happen. And this is why we call people in hospitals patients. It's not because they suffer. It's because they're now allowing things to happen to them. That's the root of passion. Jesus's passion was not just about suffering, it was allowing things to happen to him. And so patients in hospitals, those of us who suffer as patients in one way or another, not just in hospitals, have a deep connection to the story of Christ at his end. Are we good? Are you all with me? So let me just very quickly, right? Because I don't want to, I know it's early and Gospels and so on and so forth right now might be a bit hard to swallow. But let's just quickly move some of the great examples of Jesus as the empathetic leader, right? How could you not find empathy in the Gospels, and empathy that moves Jesus to compassion? The next time you hear the Christmas story, which should I say this out loud, will be in a few weeks from now, not too long from now. You hear the story. I don't know if you'll be online or in person. I don't know what your restrictions are, but right now we're limited, right, with the number of people who can be at Mass. I suspect that you know this. And it's the same story, right, from the Gospel of Luke very often, right? The same story that you know over and over and over again. You're like, yeah. And that's the time when you're kind of fidgeting, and because we know it so well. This Christmas, I want you to remember this beautiful line from the church father, 3rd century, Irenaeus, who said that the story of Christmas is how he became as we are in order that we might become as he is. If you ask my opinion, this is the be all and end all of it all, right, if I may? If we choose to enter the story of another suffering, then we choose to be an active servant who accompanies, who walks with, that's the word companion, by the way, companis, right? Who walks with the one who is stumbling in the dark, who is grasping for light in the darkness. The whole of the Christian tradition hinges on this idea that Christ makes his story our story, and our story his story. It is empathy, capital E. And that is the whole thrust of the incarnation, right? Of a God who chooses to enter our story, to suffer, to know, to experience every fragility, every wound, every joy of what it means to be human. It is bizarre that our story has at its center a God who is all-powerful and all-knowing, who chooses to assume the flesh of fragility, a God who loves his creatures enough that the creator becomes one of them. That is empathy, of choosing to enter the story. And he does it in the form of a child at Christmas. So the next time we hear the beautiful story of the Nativity, remember it is a God who chooses to make our story his own, and therefore his story ours. That is the best example of empathy that is given to us throughout history. And it is the story that we are reminded to embrace year and year again. And then, of course, Jesus grows up and he becomes the empathetic servant leader. He tells stories. And I'll start, I don't need to tell you the importance of stories because we get it, right? And his, are the parables, stories that are told so that people understand. And very often they are agricultural because people work the land, or, there were stories that made sense to people. And I need not tell you how the story of the Good Samaritan, my goodness, is a story of empathy, right? Is a story of an empathy that moves to compassion. You love this story. I mean, it is the story of Christians. It's the story I always loved when I was a pastoral animator. I don't know if you call them. I was a pastoral agent in my time when I was in my youth, who went to public schools. Can you imagine? We had Catholic public schools in Canada. And I was a child of that school. And in the Catholic, they no longer exist. But in the Catholic public school, I would be the Catholic guy that would go on and tell these stories. And I'd love to tell these stories with kindergartners and with grade sixers, because you were able to move with the details, right? To make sure this was their own. And at the end of the day, that, if you ask kids now 20 years later what they know about their tradition, it's actually quite little in Quebec, very little in Quebec, where very few of us practice and very few of us celebrate, but they know this story. They know this story, right? of, you will remember, the man who was walking from Jerusalem to Jericho. That street, by the way, was called, or that route was called the Way of Blood. It was notorious for violence. And as he is walking the route, you know the story, he is mugged, he's robbed, and he is left destitute, naked, and wounded on the side of the street. And then you know the story. A priest comes by, he crosses the road. A Levite with religious responsibilities comes by, he also crosses. And here comes the Samaritan. And this story only makes sense because when Jesus told it, people knew of the deep rift between Jews and Samaritans. I'm not talking about just not being friends. The Jews destroyed the temple of the Samaritans at Mount Gerizim. That's how you destroy people, destroy their center of worship. And in turn, the Samaritans destroyed the sacred temple, right, during the Passover. They hated each other and they were awful to each other. So this story of a Samaritan who stops to help a Jewish man makes absolutely no sense to the people that Jesus was telling it to. And yet, what are we told? That the Samaritan, in the height of his hatred, is moved by compassion. And in a moment chooses to enter the story of the dying. And in that moment acts, right? You'll remember the story, right? He puts him on his animal, right? He puts him on his donkey or on his horse, brings him to the inn for him to be taken care of because he's on his way somewhere else and cannot finish the task. And not only does he tell the innkeeper to take care of the injured, he tells him he gives him rather 2 denarii. Here is money. So that not only do you take care of him, keep taking care of him until he is well. It's what we call, here's a fancy word for us this time in the morning, supererogatory. It goes beyond what we are asking. It's not just a let me dust off your wounds, because that's the first thing the Samaritan does. He binds his wounds, puts him on his horse, on his mule, brings him to the inn and says, this is the limit of my care. This is as best as I can do. But my care will continue by mandating it to you or like lifting it to you. And so the innkeeper continues the care of the Samaritan who goes way beyond the call. It starts with empathy. It always starts with empathy. The moment that you choose to enter the story, it begins there. Because no longer is the Samaritan looking at the enemy. It's no longer an enemy. When I enter the story, you're no longer an enemy. I'm entering your story to be your companion, right? Remember we talked about solidarity or communion in our woundedness. That's what he is seeking. And that's the story of the Samaritan. It's also the story of Jesus everywhere he goes, right? We get these stories in the Gospels where Jesus gets really, really tired. And then he sees this crowd that's pressing him, right? That's always the same thing. Or he tries to get away by boat and there's a crowd that gathers around him, the great storyteller, the great healer. And you see this repeated line, and he had compassion for them. He was exhausted and he had compassion for them because they were harassed. They were bullied. They were aggravated. They were sick. They were helpless and they had no one. They were the Sarahs and the Wendy's, right? That I just told you the stories of. They are you and I, sheep without a shepherd, looking for someone to care enough to make them feel mattered. And that is the gospel. That is the ministry of Christ in his 3 years, right? That is where he goes. And it goes on. Zacchaeus, right? I loved Zacchaeus because I think I told you I was 4 feet tall in high school. So I love this story. This story was written for me, if not told for me, by Christ himself from his mouth to my ears. And I remember loving this story because Zacchaeus, even though people, again, hated him, he was a tax collector and not many people like tax collectors. But in the time of Zacchaeus, of course, there was great corruption, unlike now, of course. But in Zacchaeus's time, there was this idea, nobody liked him. And whether he was short or not is not the point. I think the idea was to compress him, to reduce his humanity because people did not like him. And that's what we do with people we don't like. We reduce them. That's what bullying is, by the way. We reduce you till you're a speck that we can step on. And we do that in different ways, by the way. We do that in different ways. And Zacchaeus is that, a little guy who comes to the crowd, even though he is corrupt, even though he does terrible things, he runs ahead. And in his wisdom, climbs a tree so that he could just get a glimpse of the one they call teacher. And of course, Jesus moves ahead in his wisdom, right? And says, "Yoo-hoo." And everyone's like, hey, we got around you first. He's too small, he's out. And Jesus says, quite the opposite. It's that little one that you've cast aside. I'm going to your house today. Right? And then, he has a meal with him and he has a moment of transformation. Jesus enters the story of Zacchaeus for an afternoon, for lunch. And Zacchaeus' life, his world, remember that? His whole world is changed. In a moment. In a moment. In one line that you say to the person who's ignored every morning, "How are you?" In a moment. The one time you choose the underdog to be your first liner in your sports team. In a moment. Petty and trivial for some of us. World making for others. This beautiful story of the woman taken in adultery is a lovely one too that you well know. Of course, the man who was involved in the adultery story is never mentioned, and that is always perplexing. It is the woman who is caught in adultery. She is brought to the square in front of Christ as an example, waiting for Christ to stumble when they say, "What do we do with her, Lord? What do we do with her?" The Pharisees say, right? Always trying to trick him. And they say the law of Moses, forgive me, is very, very clear. You stone the one caught in adultery. And then you ask, well, where are they? Where are they then? And then Jesus says, these immortal words, of course. What does the law say? Stone her. Got it. He who has not sinned then, let him cast it. Which one of you haven't sinned? Please get your stone. And of course, one by one, they drop it, realizing that there's something completely unjust here in the way we are treating other people. And Jesus says to her, right, "Who has condemned you?" And she says, "It looks like no one." And he says, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and change your life. Go and change your life." He says this all the time. Go and sin no more, right? Go and change your life, he says. How long was this interlude? I don't know, a few minutes. And her life is changed. There are some that say she becomes a disciple later, right, and follows Jesus. We don't know, of course, but I would suspect it. He just saved her life, and this is something that we do see kind of in the stories. I'll end with some of these here. Christ cleansing a leper, a person with leprosy. I love this story. Did I say that with the other? I love this story. In Jesus's day, right, as it is now under Jewish law, you never mix death and life together. This is why in the kosher tradition, or in the kashrut, the dietary laws of Judaism, you don't mix milk and meat. Milk, which is a symbol of life, it is life-giving, it's how we feed our babies, and meat, which is the symbol of death. You don't mix the two. You don't mix the two. Cemeteries are outside of the communities of the living. You do not mix the two. And somebody with leprosy looks very much like the walking dead, and I use that expression with all delicateness. Right, this understanding that that person looks like they are dead and walking, because leprosy is a very visual physical condition where there are parts of the body that do come off and so on and so forth. There's a sloughing of the body. And so people say, yeah, you can get out, right, of this community. We do not want you to impurify the living. And I don't know if you can see this in the picture, but in the very, very far distance, you can just make out that there are little buildings. So you can see that the leper has been cast out. He's been excommunicated. And in fact, he's in a hole in the ground. Do you see that? I don't know if you can tell, but he's in a hole in the ground. And what does Jesus do? He reaches out to him. And there's language of Jesus not just coming to him, but of touching him. Of touching him. That's unheard of, right? This is, you just keep him in the ground with the dead, right? This is kind of the understanding of what does Jesus do? He comes to him and touches him in a moment, entering his story, knowing that it's not maybe even the disease that is killing you. It's the fact that you've been thrown out of your people. It's the isolation, the sting, which we know very well during COVID, the sting of isolation that's going to kill you. And Jesus in that moment, I don't even care if he restores his health. That's not the point. He restores his humanhood, right? In your woundability, I join with you and you are one with us, right? This language in a moment, restoring someone's, not just their dignity, their humanity in a moment. Henry, now, and one more time, is that okay? When Jesus saw the crowd harassed and dejected, like sheep without a shepherd, he felt with them in the center of his being. When Jesus saw the blind, the paralyzed, and the deaf being brought to him from all directions, he trembled from within and experienced their pains in his own heart. That's empathy, right? When he noticed that the thousands who had followed him for days were tired and hungry, Jesus said, I am moved with compassion. And so it was with the two blind men who called after him, the leper who fell to his knees in front of him, the widow of Nain, right, who was bearing her only son. They moved Jesus. They made him feel with all his intimate sensibilities the depth of their sorrow. He became lost with the lost, hungry with the hungry, and sick with the sick. In Jesus, all suffering was sensed with a perfect sensitivity. So I think you may be coming to this, or you may have come to this. The point of empathy, the point of entering into the story of others, is to bring us into a more perfect presence. There's one thing to send a sympathy card, which is really important. It's an important gesture. There's another thing to choose to enter someone's story so much so that you are being present. And I mean truly present. I love this language. When you look at the crucifixion, when I was a kid, I would go to mass on my own. That's another story. We'll come to this some other time. But when I was a kid, I started going to mass on my own when I was about 12. And I remember going to the masses of the Passion, so near Good Friday and Palm Sunday before it, and hearing the story of Jesus' crucifixion and being completely puzzled. Because my understanding was that Jesus was the second person of the Trinity. I already got that at a 12-year-old, whatever that means. I understood that Jesus was God. And here you have Jesus on the cross, who says the great words, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani. My God, do you know this word? Yeah. Why have you forgotten me, abandoned me, or forsaken me, depending on your translation? I was always puzzled by that. I'm like, of all people, Jesus asking how God has abandoned him? Well, then goodness, I mean, if I'm feeling it and Jesus feels it, there's got to be something going on here. But I could never understand it until I got a little bit older and figured out that, wait a minute, the fact that Jesus is calling out for God, saying, why did you abandon me, suggests that he knows that God is there. You don't cry out, you don't pray to those who you think are absent. And so this deep story that looks like absence is actually a story of great presence, although we just don't see it. Do you know that story, that book that was written by Elie Wiesel, Night? It's about the Holocaust. It's a powerful book if you ever get to read it. It's a short text, if I remember. But in the story, there's a scene where people are looking at a child who is hanging in the gallows from a noose. And the child is hanging there for half an hour, still alive, in what we call a liminal state between living and dying. And people, and this man is looking up, one of the main characters, and this is based on, of course, things that have happened. And as the man is looking up in tears at this child who is struggling, who he cannot help, people behind him keep saying, where is our God? How many times have you said this just this week, reading the news, where is God? And after mustering enough courage, the man turns to them and he says, he's just there, hanging in the gallows. I think when we are suffering, we are looking for God. Don't get me wrong, I've had my time. And I continue to have my time suffering and searching for God. And I'm a theologian. I should know. But we search and we search and we search, and yet before our very eyes, God is there in the image that we do not expect him to be, right? And this is the importance of the crucifixion, that when I was a kid, I would look at this image. God forbid, I did not see God there. I did not see God there. And the wisdom of Elie Wiesel is that you're looking for God to come down from the sky. What are you looking for? A flash of lightning? He's there, crucified. He is there in that man that's by the water cooler, who's staring into space in your office. because he's trying to figure out what to do now that his marriage has just collapsed. He is with that woman who's just left the lunch table to go to the bathroom to cry in a stall because she's just found out that she's got ovarian cancer, and she's trying to figure out what that means, and it's just hit her again. He's in that person that who is constantly smiling at the office, but who is secretly struggling with what? Financial problems, the fact that his son is being bullied at school, that her mother is dying. There is our God. And empathy is choosing to recognize that. When people ask you what makes us different as Christians, what is it? Oh yeah, you're a Christian. What makes that, what difference does that make in anyone's lives? And we can say, well, we go to mass on weekends. I guess that makes it different. You can be doing other things. There's something else. It's this. This is the difference. That I choose to see God when others do not, or because others do not, or since others do not. I choose to see God here, on the gallows, on the cross, in the stall, at the water cooler, you name it. I choose to see God there. And therefore I enter the story and walk with him in that form. And that's what makes us different. As leaders, as business people, as healers, as teachers, as receptionists, as principals, I don't really care what you do, if I may be so crude. That's what we are called to do. Janitors, it doesn't matter who you are. All of us are called to be in that way. That's what makes us different. I just want a few comments on this because I want to have some discussion with you. And I know I say this about everything, but one of, I think, the most beautiful, beautiful images in all of Scripture, did I already say that? Anyway, I'll say it again, is Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. I love that story. It speaks so loudly. And when we are suffering, I don't mean necessarily because of dying or illness. When we're suffering, we always forget this story of Jesus who goes to the mountain. And you remember this, right? It's after the Last Supper. He goes to the mountain, and do you remember what he says to his friends? Can you just stay awake with me? Stay with me. Just stay with me. Don't come and pray with me. Don't hold my hand. Don't go and help me. Don't call the authorities. Don't find a room where I can go and hide. Just stay with me. That's the presence. Remember, we're talking about presence? Just be present. And he moves from them, right? He goes and he prays. And you have this lovely and heartfelt agony. It's called the agony, where, we talk about Jesus praying so hard, and if we can say, that his sweat drops like blood right into the ground, right? The image is to tell you how scared he is, how human he is. He knows that he's about to be crucified. That is not pleasant. And it's like anyone who knows that they are confronting dying and death. It's agony. There's this beautiful scene that is painted by William Blake. I love it. Do you see what's happening here? It's Jesus that is being risen. He's being raised up by an angel from heaven, right? Who is holding him up. The angel is not carrying him away. The angel is not even standing him on his feet. The angel is not even smiling or whispering counsel into his ears. The angel is just propping him up, saying, I am here. I'm here. And I may not have counsel for you. I may not have the tablet that will save your life. I may not have the answer, but I am here. It reminds me, and I know I don't want to belabor this. Can I just tell you one very quick story? I remember when my grandmother passed away, some now 15 years ago. I have an image that is struck in my mind of the visitation. I loved my grandmother. And I was raised really by women, right? My dad died and my grandfathers died quite early in my time. And so I was raised by my mom and my sister and my grandmother. So I had a great affinity for them. And I remember when my grandmother died, we went to the visitation, and where the body was exposed, right? And the people were coming together. And I have this image still of my sister, my protector. When I was bullied, she was the one, right? She was the one who came swiftly to my rescue always, and still today, right? Even though I'm in my age. And I remember the image of her being very stoic, welcoming people, thanking people, so on and so forth. And then Father Mark walked in. Father Mark was this big guy, this really great guy, a soft, gentle, compassionate soul. And he moved in, and my sister walked up to him, flung her arms around him, and wept. She fell into his arms and cried for what seemed like forever, but was like 2 minutes. He didn't say a word. He didn't say, you know, don't worry, heaven, so on and so forth, none of that. He didn't say a word. And she straightened herself up and she said, thank you, Father, and went along thanking people for coming and doing what she was doing before. Not a word. And that's presence with a capital P. So many of us think we need the right words and the right cures and the right, just like Nouwen said, in the silence, in the silence. And that's why I love this image from Blake. In the silence, somebody is holding you in the silence. So what does all of this look like, right, on the ground? And this is where I just want to end. I've already kind of made, I think, I hope I've made some kind of a point, but I hope that this will come now to fruition in what it means to be a servant leader. I like the word servant leader instead of just leader. And so I use this very often. It's a very Christian understanding of what leadership means, that we are first servants, not slaves, servants, servant leaders, right, who are meant to accompany, who are meant to enter into the story. So what does this look like? Oh, and by the way, I think I mentioned this last time too, that there's this really great, and I'll send this material to Jacqueline if you like the how do you say this in English? The slides, forgive me. If you like the slides, I'll send those to Jacqueline, who I think already has a copy of them as well, but I'm glad to send those along. But there's this great link, I don't know if you see this at the bottom here. It's to the Cleveland Clinic, has a 4-minute video on empathy. You would never think it's there to find it, right? It's this beautiful, no words, there's no speaking, and it went viral. I don't think they meant it to. It was not, you know, it was for like patients. And it's about their empathy training. They do empathy training there. And in the video, I don't mean to ruin it, but in the video, what you see is kind of like you're an observer. And you see somebody walk in, and as somebody walks in, above their heads, it says, going to visit their mom for the last time. And then you see somebody somebody skipping with his child, just found out that his wife has been is in remission. You know, and it's just this blurbs above people's heads, 4 minutes of that. As the guy, your observer is walking into the elevator. I don't know where you're going. I can't remember how it works, but it's just that. That's as Christian as it gets. That you want an empathetic servant leader? That's an empathetic servant leader. We see blurbs above people's heads. Sorry, that might sound odd, but you see what I mean? We don't see the smiley, hey, everything is great with me. We see that, of course, but we see beyond it because we choose to enter the story, not just observe it, right? And there's something about that. There's something deep about that. So here are some of the points, right? The take-home points. If you're going to be an empathetic servant leader, it means that the first thing you need to do, this is key, is to avoid assumptions. We do this all the time. And we have no clue. You know that expression in the I want to say it was in the 90s, maybe I'm dating myself, when people would say like, you don't know, you don't know me. That's right. That's exactly right. Right. And don't make these assumptions. A very quick story. Since I'm coming to the end, I feel like I can share this one. When I was just starting to teach, I was in my 20s at McGill at the university. I was a doctoral student at the time, or maybe I was a graduate student at the time. And I had the great honor, great privilege of having, of teaching, right? So I was given courses to teach and I loved it. I remember my first year, I had like 200 students in my class. Oh, and one day if we had time, I'll tell you about my first lecture, which was just hilarious, but it's not the time for that here. Anyway, at the end of my first year, my first session of teaching, I went to my office. Now, office, I put in quotation marks. An office for a graduate student at a university is like a hole in the cellar. And so I went to my hole in the cellar, and a student, after the exam, you know, the term had come in and gone, and the exam was written and so on and so forth. And student knocked on my door. And he said, "Professor?" And I'm like, "It's just Cory. I'm no professor yet, but it's just Cory." And he said, can I talk to you now that the term's over? I said, "Yeah, Jonathan, of course, you know, my door's open. You know how this works, right?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "I guess it's not about clarifying stuff since you've just written the exam. So I guess it's not about the material." But he's like, and he closed the office door, which was against McGill policy. And so I knew something was something was going on. And he came very, very close to me. Sat almost like, I felt like he was sitting in my lap, but he came very, very close to me and said, whispered, even though the door was closed and there was no one else around, do you believe any of this stuff? I'm like, I'm sorry? He's like, you were teaching about how the religions think of the environment. That's what I was teaching that year, how the religions of the world think about the environment. He said, do you believe any of it? I'm like, any of it like God? He's like, yes, we don't speak God in public in Quebec. It's a very taboo church and state, right? Some other time. He's like, do you believe in God? Still whispering, right? And well-trained in Quebec culture. And I'm like, yeah, I'm Catholic. And he had his hand to his chest and said, and he said this, you're just so brilliant. And in a moment, I was incredibly flattered. I was in my 20s month. And I'm like, oh, right? Suddenly deeply offended by the fact that he thought, oh, if you're of some kind of intelligence, you can't possibly believe in this stuff. And then he made the very second big mistake of saying, well, Professor, I'm going to use Professor. Well, Professor, I'm sure it's because, you believe in this whole God and God who is good and loves you and so on and so forth because you've had a silver spoon in your mouth, I'm sure. I'm sure you come from an educated family. And then he started, educated family, healthy and rich and everything that you need. No wonder you're happy and love a God who is good. You have everything going for you. And there was a pause, a long pause. And I said, yeah, you need to sit down, because he was saying that on his way out. I'm like, you need to sit down. And he sat down, and then I began. So when I was 1, my dad died of a sudden heart attack. It left my family in absolute tragedy. My mother was suicidal. She lived only because she had tiny children. She said it to her dying day. And then when my grandfather, and I went through poverty and food baskets and so on and so forth. I went through it. And as the tears started to stream down his face, I stopped, because my point wasn't to make him cry, right? And be like, yeah, you get this, right? That wasn't my point. Talk about empathy, right? That wasn't my point. But I wanted him to understand something, that these deep assumptions that he was using, not about me, I didn't care, about anyone. This deep ignorance that we have about others that orients the way we treat others needs to be corrected, needs desperately to be corrected. That we treat others or we behave with others because of something we think we know about them, when we have no idea what lurks behind the smile, with sufferings they've endured, with things that they are going through. Nobody knows today that I'm still deeply grieving the passing of my mother. Nobody knows, right? But you know what that is. Just recently, my own dean, I'm a co-dean, right? The other dean was saying to me, he came into my office in tears, and this is not confidential, because somebody was arguing with him about something petty. And it was hard for him because it happened to be what would have been the 18th birthday of his daughter, who passed away when she was an infant. So the day, he came to work, like every day, with something, a hidden something. Avoid assumptions. If you're going to think about others and enter into conversation and enter the stories of others, strive to understand them. Strive to understand their experiences. Ask them questions. Try to see where they're going. Open the way to sharing that comes from their side first, not yours. Let them open the story to you, because it's hard to plunge into a story that you've not been invited to partake in. And that means a genuine and active mutual listening. And I mean that. We throw that word all the time around. Communication, listening. Yes, of course. Listening is this presence that I'm talking to you about. It doesn't mean having the right thing to say. This is my problem. I don't know about you. This is my problem. When somebody's confiding, I get this a lot with students and with colleagues. As a dean, I get this with colleagues who come into my office and close the door and talk, right? And very often among my many weaknesses is the fact that I'm always trying to think about the right thing to say in my head as they're talking, right? And it's not rude, it's because I want to help. I desperately want to help. They're obviously talking to me through tears because something is awful, and they've come to me, and I feel like I need to have the repository of wisdom that gives them something to leave my office with, a grain of something. And so I miss sometimes part of the story because I'm thinking of what the right thing is to say when I should just be quiet. Be still, the Psalms say. Be still and know that I am God. In the silence, you don't need a doctorate to sit in the silence. And a doctorate did me no well to teach me that, right? Didn't give me any goodness to think about that on my own. I learned that in my time. Silence and listen. A very quick story. Another quick story, is this okay? One very quick story, I promise. This one some of you have heard a million times, I suspect in different ways. And Vanessa's still with us on the call, is like, oh God, not this one. When I was a kid, when I was 19, I want to say, the bishop of my diocese said, Cory, we are going to make you head of faith education. That's what we call it, sacrament prep and faith education. And I had the stupidity to tell my bishop, oh no, you're making a big mistake, Monseigneur, Your Grace. You're making a big mistake. I'm practically still eating sand and I use Velcros for my shoes. Putting me in charge of faith education is a deep mistake. I don't know if you felt like God is calling you to do this, but he is not. He's calling somebody else. Listen carefully, because this is the wrong wisdom that you're getting. And he said, oh, Cory, and he tapped me on my head. I always got tapped on the head. He tapped on my head and said, you'll learn. You start tomorrow. Something like that. And on my first day, I remember wearing the best jogging suit I could find, my best jogging suit with my penny loafers. Are those things? I don't know. With dress shoes. I remember because my wife laughs whenever I tell this story. And she's like, really, Cory? Not only were you a fashion faux pas early though. Anyway, wore this to the office. And I didn't know I was going to the diocese for the first time as a pastoral agent. And I didn't know what to bring. This is before laptops and iPads and all this, right? So I brought what I thought I was supposed to bring, a Bible. By the way, we don't crack open the Bible while we're working as pastoral agents all that often, and a pencil. I didn't know what I was doing. On one of the first days that I was there, because I wasn't there often, I was a full-time university student, right? So I was there a few days. You know how this works. I remember getting this call. A woman who said, is this Cory Labrecque? And I said, oh, yes, this is me. She said, I saw your name somewhere for the sacraments, and I'm ready to get my son done. That's the language that we have in Quebec. It may be similar language in the United States. I'm ready to get my son done. And I'm like, done? She's like, first communion. I'm like, oh, you just want to get that done. Okay, fine. I'm like, and what's your son's first name? And she said, I used to love the church. And I said, oh, lovely. What's your son's first name? And she said, well, I broke away from the church, 10 years ago. And I'm like, and your son, his first name? I didn't want to know. Talk about no empathy. I didn't want to get into the story. I didn't want to, because God knows, right? Then she said, well, and she made me enter the story anyway, right? Some people will lure you, will invite you with a capital I into the story. So she said very quickly, 10 years ago, I gave birth to my firstborn. The happiest day of my life. And just a few hours later, my firstborn was taken away. And I said, I'm sorry. She died unexpectedly. Nobody knew what was happening. The APGAR scores were high, and she just died. And there was a pause on the phone. And as a 19-year-old, I didn't know what to say. I was a child myself, like, what am I supposed to say to this? And I could hear that she was crying. And then she said, but that was not what hurt me the most, I don't think, And I'm like, oh, what's happening? She said, well, somebody who, and I can't remember how she said this, but just bear with me. She said, somebody identified as being a Catholic. I don't know if it was an attendant or somebody who was in the room with her, had the gall to say, how sad that you've lost a child, in some words. How sad it is that you belong to a faith tradition that believes that children who die without baptism don't do so well. And I was floored at 19 thinking, what person in the grief of a mother, of a parent, thinks that those are words of wisdom at a time when somebody is themselves lingering, I think, between life and death? She's probably healthy. But I think I've known people to shut the lights out, right? Shut the lights off even in the prime of health, and have said, yeah, that's it for me, thank you. And I said, what was in your head? Because that was the point of the story. And she said, Cory, from that day I left the church because they were, if that's the case, how can I go back to a church that believes that? And I don't know who was crying at this point. This is why I didn't become a doctor, by the way. I was originally trained to become a doctor. I would be the one crying more with the patients, and I'd be the worst doctor ever. I'd have empathy, but to the state of paralysis where it wouldn't move me to compassion. I'd be the one crying and weeping all the time. I do this all the time, it's a problem. And I was weeping on the phone as a 19-year-old, not knowing really the implications. I was too young to know what that meant, but I knew as a kid who lost his father what it looks like, the death between a parent and a child. I understood the depths of that. And I told her this, I still remember this. I said to her, I repeated almost the words I said to my bishop. I'm like, sorry, Nancy, I don't know what, I said this, I don't know what to say. I'm just a kid, and I'm crying. I was crying to her. I said, I'm just a kid, I was saying through tears. And I'm like, I don't know anything. I'm studying this, I am a student, I have an exam tomorrow. I don't know why the bishop has put me in this office. And then I said, but there are some things I do know. And I do know my tradition really well. And I think that's why the bishop put me here, not because I'm competent. It's because I do know some things. And my catechism teaches me, because one of the things that I can do is memorize, that children who die without baptism are entrusted, that's the word, not submitted, entrusted to the infinite mercy of God, period. And if you don't believe me, it's 1261 of the catechism. And I'm not doing this at all. But in that second, it took me 3 seconds to say that, she said, Joseph. And I said, I'm sorry? Joseph Terrier, that's my son's name. And so how does it work? Like, where do I come to the church? And as if it never happened, right? And not to say like, yay, 1 point for Cory, I get that at the gates when my time comes that I've gotten another one in. 0. In a moment, we can destroy a world. And in a moment, we can build it. In a moment. Active listening. Not just team building, that's a word that we see all the time, right? It's solidarity. There's a difference between building a team and communion. Right? Building a team to do something, to be task-oriented, and building communion. Building a family. I get in trouble all the time because I talk about my faculty as a family, and they're like, Cory, you're getting a little cliche. I'm like, no. If my professors come to work and don't feel like they can find some kind of a refuge here where they are most of the time, leading and busy and writing and teaching and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they're here more than they are with their kids, I think. I'm like, if they can't find a family here or some kind of sense of communion, then I have failed as a dean. I failed as a dean. I'm the worst when it comes to finance and budget, and I have no idea. I can barely write a $sign down. But at least I know the wisdom of not team building, but communion building, right? Of fostering a family here. So that people do feel they can come to my office or any other colleague's office to say, oh my gosh, my mom who's 90, and I know she's 90, but she's dying. And I'm having such a hard time teaching my class. If you can't find that here, I've done something wrong. There's something I need to instill here as a servant leader. And if that's all I've done, then that's good to me. That's all I've done, that's good to me. That's what makes us different. That's what makes us different, because the world wants the better economist and financier and the hyper competitive and the hyper functional and the each to their own mentality. That is not our story. That's not our story. Remember this language of co-woundability, right? Remember that language. Change that word vulnerability for woundable. You and I, woundable. The student that is getting on my nerves, woundable. Let's start there. And let's be open to stories. Because when I'm telling my stories, guaranteed, you're like, some people are rolling their eyes like, oh God, not this one again. But when I'm telling the story of the woman with her child, or Sarah by the school entrance, or even my sister, somebody else's story. You know, I take other people's stories. It's because I see something in there. I've had stories like that. You can bind your stories to my stories. That's how we build. That's how we make communion. We bind our stories. We are one in one story, right? The actors of one story. And I just want to end with, you know, this covenant of presence. It's not just presence, right? When we're with others, it's a covenant. It's the way I unite myself to others. And I could have nothing to say, but I could sit with you. There's this lovely language. Do you know that story of Moses with the burning bush? The part of that story that I love the best is the part that nobody thinks about. The part where he takes off his shoes and walks on hallowed ground. I have a physician friend, a doctor friend, who takes his shoes off when he walks into the room of a patient because it's hallowed ground. And I used to do that as well. That winters in Quebec are a bit tricky. But that language of taking your shoes off, we do this in homes in Quebec as well, right? We don't walk around with our shoes on, we take our shoes off because you're in hallowed ground. Here you are with family. Here you are in the presence of God, right? That language of the guy at the water cooler, the language, you know, that all that stuff, that language of presence, capital P, capital P. So this is where I end, right? So I don't know, money apparently is like some big magazine. I'm so embarrassed. I don't know anything about business. I'm the worst. I don't know why I'm here. But at the end of the day, I was reading that for a few years, empathy was considered to be the hottest trend in leadership. The hottest trend. As soon as I saw it, I'm like, oh, here it is, marketable. Let me market it, right? Let me market it. And there's this really great trend of empathy building. There's that stuff. I think I'm doing that actually right now with you. There's this empathy building stuff that's happening and it's awesome. I think it's great. It's to change the dynamics of your community. It's to go from, I hope, for Christians, from team building to communion building to solidarity. Yeah, great, wonderful. But it's not just a trend for us. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples. It is our banner. I tuck my cross, my crucifix, I tuck it into my shirt because I do not need to wear it for everyone to see. I'm proud of my tradition, and you should. Please do if you do that. But I don't need to. People will know that I'm Christian. People will know the one I follow because of who I am, because of what I do. Let that be the gospel. Let that be the gospel. Is that okay? I have a few questions about like what are yours. I'll keep this with Jacqueline. Some stories that you can use to stir some discussion amongst yourselves in this wonderful group. I'm so excited. I'm so happy that you're in this leadership group. You have chosen wisely to be in the right communion of people, because I think just the fact that you signed up for this, or were deeply encouraged to, just the fact that you're in this communion seems to suggest to me as an outsider that you're saying, okay, wait a minute, I'm Catholic or I'm Christian, and these values mean a lot to me. I'm also in business. I'm also a leader of some kind, or I want to be a leader of some kind, and I can't make them distinct. I cannot leave my Christianity at the church or my Christianity at home. I'm a Christian business person or a Christian leader. What is this supposed to look like? How is this supposed to be different? Or is it just run of the mill, same old, just like everyone else? And the Christian answer is cultivating this deep sense of empathy, because that's what a leader is supposed to look like. Gone should be the days that empathy and solidarity and listening to others and building up communion are considered weaknesses and low strategies. They are our calling card. It's what makes you and I Christian. Is that good? Let me stop sharing my screen. Forgive me, I just noticed that there were some comments or questions in the discussion panel. Forgive me, Jacqueline, I'm sorry that I didn't.
Oh my goodness, Cory. I cry every single year.
Oh no, sorry, that was not my intention.
I love it. and you say that, and this is like, we should have like a comedy show, but because I say that, then Cory, you apologize for me. No, but I think it's beautiful.
So
It's a
Canadian.
good tears. I should not have, I don't know. And every year I go into this, I know this, I'm like, why did I even wear eye makeup? But I mean, I have a great tactic. I just like, I roll my head back and let the tears pool in my eyes. But I mean, I think that's so beautiful though, because like, again, we talk about storytelling, and stories connect us. Again, like you said, they build that sense of communion. And so I really wanted to give, and I know that, in the chat we had, that was just really me just blowing you up, saying like, I love the artwork. I love it. That's all from me.
Oh, thank you, Sylvia.
However, I do want to open it up. I would love to open it up for discussion from the audience members. So please, if you have any questions, this is a great way to ask. This is a great time to ask questions of Cory. And I have a couple, but I definitely wanted to give time to our participants because we have about 15 minutes for questions.
So, but before, Sophia, before you do that, Cory, I've heard a theme or a version of your presentation today. And I just wanted to just very quickly, because we only have 15 minutes, but I think this whole idea of no assumptions, when you talk about this, when you've talked about it before, you've really also talked about the fact that there are people who are marginalized in our society because they're different from us. And this whole concept about empathy spreads to them as well. It's not only just people that are in dire situations, right. But if you just want to like 2 minutes on that, because that is something that in our work, we strive to see his face. Right. So that whole concept of not judging and not assuming allows us to welcome people no matter where they are or who they are.
Spoken like a servant leader, Vanessa, right? That's exactly right. I mean, at the end of the day, the gospel calling where Jesus says, that I was there, and they say, where were you? Well, I was the one that you fed, that you gave drink to, that you clothed. That's the banner of Christianity. And Vanessa, it reminds me of this story, very quick. My mom, in her day, was an administrator, administrator for one of the largest homeless shelters in Montreal, which is why I have such an affinity, one of the reasons, many reasons, that I have an affinity for Catholic Charities of Atlanta. So my mom worked with a homeless shelter. And I remember once her saying in passing that she was managing the accounts of one of the residents. And I said, the accounts? I was like in primary school. And I said, accounts? And she said, yeah, I manage their money and make sure that that their accounts are not frozen and that they have freedom to it and so on and so forth. And I said, I thought you worked at a homeless shelter, right? Of course, I have assumptions, right? All these assumptions. I said, oh, yeah, well, one of our residents has, I don't know, $3.6 million in his account. I remember saying, I don't understand what you're talking about just now. She said, yeah, he was head of, and I can't remember, some symphony orchestra. I thought it might be Montreal, but maybe not. She said, yep. And what happened was his wife and daughter perished in a car accident. And the day he found out, he walked straight out of his mansion and never looked back. These assumptions that we have of people who look a certain way, or people who have a certain story, people who come from a certain provenance, it's almost always wrong. And I think that's exactly what Vanessa, exactly the population I think that, Catholic Charities serves and accompanies is almost always the victim of that, the victim of misplaced assumptions that reorient the way we behave towards people. And I think CCA and many of us in the church try to bring that to the fore, right? Stop with your assumptions. Start instead with something else, which is what you were saying, Vanessa. How about instead of starting with false assumptions or any assumptions, we start with the face of Christ. Start there, because the face of Christ was also dirtied, right? There's something about that. And I think that's really, and it's so easy for me to say it. So easy to say. So easy to teach this stuff. Now leave your buildings and tell me how well it goes today. Right?
Wow. I mean, and that's so true. Cory, we did have a question come through.
Please.
Can you please share the name of the work that was quoted by Henry Nguyen on woundability?
Yeah, so that woundability is actually a word I've been using, not to say that I have any wisdom and I may have stolen it.
The work that the work from where that quote came from.
So there's this beautiful quote at the very beginning. And, you know, as I said, I'll give this, you know what? Is this from LaRonda? Who asked that question?
Yes, it was from LaRonda.
Oh, wonderful. I'm going to send these slides to Jacqueline so you could see where they all come from. But because I've written it at the bottom, even the page, so you'll be able to find it. But one of them comes from Nouwen's Out of Solitude. And there was another one that talked about Jesus that was from a book called Compassion, a reflection on the Christian life.
Beautiful, beautiful, excellent. Do we have any other questions? Because I have a couple, you know, discussion items, but I definitely wanted to give the floor to anybody who had something pressing that they wanted to ask or discuss. We still have 10 minutes for discussion, so wanted to open the floor to you all. All right, well, I'll go ahead and ask.
I'll go.
Oh, good, excellent. I counted to 10. Normally, you count to 10.
Couldn't get to that unmute fast enough. So Cory, thank you so much. What an amazing way to start the day. I would love to be able to share more about you on LinkedIn and Facebook. So do you have a link that says more about you? So, you know, your words are so astounding that it makes you want to have other people hear, and it makes it easy for people to go, you know what? Yeah, I need to be living this way. So if you have information that you can share, that we can share on social media, that would be wonderful.
Thank you, Mark. That's so kind of you. And I mean, and at the end of the day, what I find, I mean, I'm always embarrassed by kind words, and they always come very freely from people of the South with your sacred hospitality and your goodness. So I'm not used to, and not to say that my people in the North are terrible, but you know, there's such a beauty in the gratitude of the South. And I know I'm being general, and certainly I see that in you, Marla. Thank you. It's interesting because right now I have a professional page, right? That's all in French, which is more of a fun thing for people to figure out who I am by reading it. But I'll try to send you, Marla, if I see anything that I think might be of interest, I'll try to send you, or I'll send to Jacqueline some stuff that you can maybe look at. Something that might be important or might be interesting is very quickly, Marla, and I don't want to belabor this, but after my mom passed away in 2018, you had a hard time, as we do, right? I had a really hard time. And I was asked by a publisher here in Canada to write about my experience, suffering. And I said, are you kidding? I'm like, you're asking a bioethicist to write about suffering right now? He's like, oh no, we don't want to hear your story as a bioethics specialist. We want to hear your story as a Catholic son. And I thought, oh, you're lucky you said the right words just there, because my answer was going to be no, right? I was having such a hard time. I'm like, you really want me to speak about something so intimate? But then I wondered, you know, maybe there is something that can be shared with people who are looking to develop this kind of sense of compassion. It's with a certain lens in mind, but it's meant, you know, I'm writing it just now. It's a really hard write, but I think it might be of use. And even for people who are developing these kinds of skills as leaders in business, which is not what the audience is, right? But I'll try to send some of these links, Marla. Thank you.
That'd be wonderful.
Wonderful. We have a question that came in from LaRonda, Cory, and you know, how do you live? And I think this is something that is relevant. I mean, it's a great question. How do you live your Catholic faith authentically in an increasingly secularized society?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the question, that's one of the big questions that is asked here all the time. In Quebec, I remember when I was in Atlanta, I was invited to give a talk on the Church of Quebec. I don't know why. I'm like, do you even know where Quebec, like, have you ever heard of my province before? Is really, and they're like, yeah, we know it to be the bastion of Catholicism, right? It was called Cradle of Catholicism in North America. We educated the priests who would go out to the world. It was here that would happen. And now our churches are being deconsecrated and sold as condominiums because there is nobody in them, right? We import, I don't like that language of import export, but we are bringing priests in. We don't have them. If you're a priest that has 8 parishes, you're lucky, right? It's a different world. Overnight, it's become a different world. And this whole language of using your faith tradition to make claims. I'm a Catholic bioethicist. And so when I'm talking about medical aid in dying or euthanasia and other big topics, and I incorporate my faith tradition, very often you have to do that incredibly carefully.
Yeah.
Because if you don't do it rightly, if I may, people will think you're trying to impose a faith tradition, which doesn't work here. There's a delicate relationship here between the church and the state, because people of Quebec, who are very proud people, like everywhere else I suspect, know that their roots are very Catholic. The Catholic Church founded and ran our schools, our hospital. I mean, it was all of that here until the 60s with the Quiet Revolution, and all of that kind of was swept off its feet. But so people have a connection to it. We all of our grandparents and before that were deep Catholics, right? And now there's an ignorance about what that all means. But I think it's interesting because for those of us who are Catholics and celebrating Catholics who love our traditions, I feel more and more in a secular world attached to my tradition because I need to know it really well. And I don't mean in terms of like cognition, but when I live my tradition, and people, because I know what happens is that I live my tradition in a certain way that people say, oh, you're volunteering where now? And you're involved with Catholic charity, whatever it is that seems to make it look like you're doing good things. And people say, why? And I'm like, well, it's part of my calling as a Christian. And then they ask the questions that I need to be equipped to answer. Because often it's a ridiculing, or it's a criticizing, or it's a politicizing of my tradition. And if I don't know it well enough, I could leave it behind like that woman did. Remember that I talked to you about? That woman did, who left the church behind because she was misled. When the church should have been the first string of comfort for her.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And so I think that's our challenge, right? Is to not just know it. I mean, like read about it and memorize it. The more you learn about the wisdom of this tradition, the more you love the tradition. It is so beautiful. And I'm bombarded all the time with cases about pedophilia, cases about, as you well know, in Canada, First Nations and residential schools. We're seeing a lot of things. As you can imagine, I'm very, very busy as an ethicist. And it's heartbreaking. All of it is heartbreaking. And it's so easy for me to be on the fence, right? And to do this. I'm out. It's just so much attack, right? There's a lot of attacking. But I'm not learning about my tradition for apologetics, right? That's the fancy word of defending my tradition. I'm not here with my shield saying, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. Quite the opposite. You start with empathy. Oh my God, that was your experience? It's not oh, well, I wasn't involved. That was your experience? That's empathy. Starts with empathy, right? And I think this, my life has been very much that, a learning the tradition, to love it, and to also clarify a lot of the errors around it, right? A lot of the people think about certain things about my tradition that are wrong. And so I feel like my banner is to serve first, then to teach.
I'm so happy you brought up First Nations as well, because I actually wanted to ask a question about that. And just, I mean, yeah, like I totally hear you. I work a lot we all work in a secularized society. And I think it's so easy, right, for people to say, you're a Catholic, that means X, Y, and Z. And something I gently have done with people when they come across, and again, like the pedophilia, the church has done that, there are people, there are people in the church who have done horrible things. Like, let's just be completely real. Like, I'm not, but I agree. It's coming from that point of empathy and being like, oh my gosh, but also being able to say, my church, the catechism does not teach that. Let me share with you. And just like, really coming across that. We have 2 more minutes. So I'm lightning round for you, Cory. Okay. How are you navigating, with COVID and everything? It's so hard. How are you navigating with COVID and just everything that has come as a result of that.
Yeah. So, I mean, for Christians, physical distancing cannot mean social distancing. That to me is so important, right? I'm all for distancing to protect others. You better believe, I mean, I know that that's also highly politicized. I just gave a huge talk at McGill on Friday about the ethics of vaccinations, and that's another, talk altogether. But as for us, physical distancing cannot amount to social distancing. That means that yes, you keep the distance that's prescribed to protect others. It doesn't get more basic than that to me under the Christian banner, right? Even if we're not so sure, whatever, if there's some sense that it might protect others, then I'm going to do that, right? And that's for sure. However, as a communion people, as a Eucharistic people, we have to understand that there are people who are now being isolated because of these distancing laws, or because of others are not able to be vaccinated or whatever. And I think this is a charge to the church, or mandate to the church, to heighten her efforts in solidarity. Just as a quick example. So in my own church right now, we're allowed to have 30 people in our pews. We're a very, very small church. 30 people in our pews, which means, another 30, 40, 50 people can't come to the church. And some of them don't because they're afraid. They're afraid. So does that mean global pandemic, you're already isolated from everything else, everything looks terrible, and now you can't even be with your own, right? Or your own people, you can't even worship and so on and so forth. It can't mean that. And so just very quickly, one of the things that we did as of late is, like at Christmas, we hand delivered little gifts with cards, handwritten cards to people saying, we miss you, we love you, we're going to say your name next time you see us online, whatever it takes for you to know that it's okay for you to be at home. Yeah. And it's okay for you to be at home. It's okay to be distant, but I'm not going to make you socially isolated. And the church has an obligation. It's not responsibility. It's an obligation to keep the communion intact while keeping people safe. I think that's been important. Yeah.
I love it. Thank you so much for that. That is all for today. We're going to be closing out. I would like to turn the floor over to the co-chairs. If there are any announcements to be made, I'd love for you all to be able to make those announcements if there are any. And then I will close this out in closing prayer.
Yeah, before we go to that, can I just say, Cory, I know I opened with a thank you, but just a deep appreciation. Cory came to Emory as a professor. I don't know if the proper term is visiting professor. And that's where we originally met him. He was a keynote speaker for the leadership class one year. And I met him in a coffee shop when he was visiting Emory after he returned to Canada, and asked him to be involved with us more. And he graciously didn't hesitate and said yes. And I'm so grateful that I went that day, that we had coffee, and that I was able to meet you. But more importantly, your life has changed so much since we first met you, and your professional career has really taken off. You've been involved in Vatican committees, and the fact that you still take the time to be with us, to share with us, to help us grow as servant leaders and as an organization. And I feel like you're almost our spiritual guide. So I can't thank you enough. I know you don't like adulation, but I just really wanted to make sure that that really how profoundly we appreciate your time and what you've shared with us and continue to share. So thank you so much. Really
Thank you,
appreciate
Vanessa.
it.
You're a joy. And the work of Catholic Charities is, to me, a holy and sacred ministry. And it will only ever be my privilege to be even remotely connected to you.
Thank you, my friend.
Excellent.
Thank you so
Are there any
much.
announcements?
Just a couple of things. First of all, thank you again for everyone joining us this morning. This has been just the perfect way to start the day, and I've been looking forward to this for so long. So thank you again so much. Couple of announcements. First of all, after this event, you will be receiving a survey. So please take the time to complete that survey. It's very important for us to get your feedback. Also, in the next ledger, you will receive the RSVPFI for the October 14th event. So please make sure you do RSVP. That will be in person. So it'll be so wonderful to be able to be all together again. It feels like forever since our retreat. So I'm looking forward to seeing everyone. And Other than that, just make sure you do meet with your small groups afterwards. I know your Saint group leaders will be coordinating that with you. And we've got some great discussion questions that have come out of today's session. So I'm looking forward to meeting, I know with my Saint group, and I know you look forward to meeting with yours soon too. And that's all for me. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nicole. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I know we're 3 minutes over and I want to be sensitive to time, but Cory, just thank you for your words of wisdom, your compassionate and authentic leadership. I think that is something that is so sorely needed in this day and age. And thank you for breathing life into this. Thank you so much. Thank you to the Catholic Charities staff, all of our volunteers for making this event possible. Events like today are not possible without the help of our volunteers and staff. So virtual round of applause to all of them.
Thank you.
Thank you all. And we are going to close out in prayer in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Oh God, come to our aid. Instill within each of us the desire to grow more like you, that we may willingly embrace the life of leadership and service to which you have called us. When we experience challenges, difficulties, and setbacks, provide us with the loving support we need to press on and continue to build your kingdom. We ask this in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Have a beautiful day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, Cory. Thank you, Sophia. Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank
and
you,
Nicole.
Jacqueline. Thanks, everybody. Have a beautiful day.
Have a wonderful day.